Oh, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you. Welcome for coming to Boise River Enhancement Network's Riverside Chats. These are sponsored by Kennedy Wilson, and Bren envisions these as an opportunity for an intriguing conversation with people in the community who work with the Boise River. So today we're excited to introduce Erin Whorton. She is a hydrologist with NRCS, working on their SNOTEL program. She is a water supply specialist for the Idaho Snow Survey. She is responsible for understanding how our region's snowpack affects water supply conditions, and her work focuses on communicating snowpack, precipitation, and streamflow conditions to water users, the media, and helping maintain the SNOTEL monitoring network. As a snow and glacier scientist, her work has taken her all over the world, including Alaska, Antarctica, and Greenland. Previously, Erin led the Glacier and Climate Program in Washington State for US Geological Survey. Sorry. Thank you, Erin. And we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on such a beautiful sunny day. So this talk encompasses a lot of things. We're going to talk about current snow conditions, snowpack conditions in the Boise River watershed. We're going to talk a little bit about snow science, and we're going to talk a lot about how we measure snow and get to those numbers of understanding the snowpack. Then we're going to talk also about how snowpack translates into stream flow and water supply, and what that might look like for the future here in the Western United States. Feel free to put your questions in the chat or just ask if you want clarification on something. Kind of like to try a new style of not like holding questions to the end, because I'm talking about so many different things that, you know, I want everybody to get their questions in at the time that matters to them when they're thinking about them. All right, let's go. Maybe. This is always the part where you're like, which screen do I click on so that it actually advances? There we go. So Danny did an awesome job introducing me. Thank you. I moved here about a year ago to work with the Idaho Snow Survey for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is a part of the US Department of Agriculture. Part of that, I was in Washington and Alaska working on the USGS Glacier Research Program. This is a picture from the hut up in Washington, where it's the longest running glacier monitoring program in the country and one of the longest running ones in the world. So it's a real privilege to get to be part of that history. So the Snow Survey is part of the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is actually originally the Soil Conservation Service that was created in the Depression. And I'm not exactly sure why the Snow Survey ended up in the soil part. I've forgotten that part, but it was created because the West's reliance on snow melt to generate the water that's needed for agriculture, ranching operations, and any sort of water supply issues in the West. And so the Snow Survey program encompasses 13 states, all the way from Alaska to New Mexico. So Colorado, New Mexico, and Montana are the eastern border of the program, because that's where the majority of snowpack is generating water for mainly irrigation. And so because NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, is part of the US Department of Agriculture, a big part of our focus is on figuring out what water supply is every year and forecasting how much water is available for irrigation and flood control as well. So Danny mentioned the word SNOTEL. So what are SNOTEL? This is picture right in the center is a SNOTEL station at the Morris Creek site. So just up past Idaho City. And the SNOTEL stations are these automatic weather stations that measure information about air temperature, precipitation, the snowpack, obviously, and things like that. And that's sort of the modern evolution of the snow program. Across those 13 states where we measure snow, there's about 850 of these SNOTEL stations. we visit them once to twice a year for maintenance purposes. And then of course, when things break, we have to go there more often. And every year, I learned the statistic preparing for the talk, we get at least 12 bear attacks that like destroy the SNOTEL station in some sort of format. So we're constantly sort of guarding against Mother Nature in all its forms to get this data. So we have a bunch of different kinds of sites through this monitoring network that NRCS runs. The blue are these SNOTEL stations. So those are those automated snow stations. We have some things called SCAN, which also mostly focuses on soil temperatures and soil moisture. And then SNOLIGHT, which is sort of like a scaled down SNOTEL. So more just snowpack, precipitation, and temperature. And then those light blue dots, kind of like, we're going to talk more about those. Those are the snow course. So those are where we make the manual measurements at the first of the month. And this really goes back to the history of the program when this program first started. And I'm going to get into that a little bit because it's interesting how this all began. This is also where you can see the overlap where our snow monitoring networks are in the blue areas on this little inset map. This is where snowpack is the main source of surface water in the West. So even before we had these kind of digital maps, our predecessors were really keen and good at figuring out where the most important monitoring places, the most important monitoring snowpack places were in our nation. So one term that you might have heard, and you're going to hear a lot today, is called snow water equivalent, and we just shorten it up and call SWE. And basically, it's a way of measuring how much water content is in the snowpack. So if you had on the right, like 10 inches of snow and you melted that instantly, how much water is in the snowpack? If you have like a really dry snow, you might only have a few inches of water in a 3-foot snowpack. In other places like the Cascades or the Sierras where the snowpack is a lot wetter, that 3 feet might have 6-7 inches of water. So it gives us a way of making a uniform measurement across the entire world. This is how scientists measure snow, so that we can compare the amount of water content in snowpack regardless of how deep the snow is. So this term SWE is something you're going to hear quite a bit, and you'll see it when you're like reading news articles about the snowpack and things like that. All right, audience participation time. So I found this book for free. It's called Snow Stumpers. It is all these pictures of like mysteries, like what is the snow doing? And it kind of gives you some insights into snow science. So you're going to start thinking like a snow science here. So this question is looking at the top picture, which way was the wind blowing? And then the bottom is just showing you how much snow can be blown by the wind and covering objects like a car. So you can either type in the chat, I can't really see that, but or you can unmute yourself and shout out answers. There's gonna be a couple of these, so we'll just endure an awkward silence if nobody has anything to say. Any guesses?
We got a left to right from Val Decker.
Awesome, good job.
A few more too coming in. That's what I think.
Left to right. So from the little bit of snow on the car to the thicker part on the snow. Exactly. So that is the way the wind's direction was blowing. So what happens is when the wind's blowing quickly, it can transport the snow. But then when it's crossing like a sheltered area, like a fence or like the side of the car, the wind speed slows down, and so the snow can't be captured in the area where it falls out. So that's why the snow will deposit on the what's called the leeward side of the wind. Yay! Okay, so how does that translate to the real world snow? I mean, here we see it when you're walking around. one of the ways that you might see this process in action when you're in the mountains around this area, or pretty much any mountains, is cornices. So this image, this, I guess, picture on the left is showing, the windward side. That's like the scouring, because the wind's moving fast, it's pulling that snow. And then as it goes across a ridge, there's like a slowing down process of the wind. And so the snow gets deposited. And so on the right, you can see what that cornice will look like. You'll see this pretty much on any kind of ridge, past a fence. That's why snow fences work, because of that slowing down process. It manually slows down the wind. And then, so also connecting the snow science and to avalanche hazards, like here on the bottom picture, this is where a cornice failed, because eventually that snow loses its cohesive properties, and it can fail, and it can cause really large avalanches. So anyways, snow science and connecting some of that to what you might see as you're hiking about or moving around in the mountains.
Erin, we have a question in the chat.
Oh, yay. Okay, go ahead.
Does eddying on the lee side of the ridge play a part in the formation of cornices?
That's a good question. I think it does, probably because there can be scouring below the cornice. So like that upper right-hand part can get scoured. You'll see those like updrafts coming up on a wind where, you'll see the snow blowing and you'll see it like kind of doing that eddying. So that is part of it. It mostly has to do with that slowing down of the wind as the main wind direction is moving. And so you can use cornices as a way to see where the main wind direction was, like during a storm. So like they're kind of like natural wind vanes in a way. And a big part of why it all sticks together, just because snow, has all the little fingers on the snowflake, and so it breaks, and then again they get stuck together, and it makes this like big cohesive mass. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Snow Survey. So the Snow Survey started in Nevada with this professor called James Church, and he's kind of like the godfather of snow science in terms of the United States. I don't know what his counterpart might be on some of the other continents, but he really began measuring snow, and he was the first one to really recognize, or at least recognize it in the publication history, documented history, that snowpack played a major part in terms of water supply. So he lived near Reno, near Lake Tahoe, and even at that time, water managers want to know how much water was coming into Lake Tahoe, how much they can take out for irrigation, things like that. So in 1935, Congress created the Snow Survey and Water Supply Forecasting Program, which is sort of the official name of the, the Snow Survey. And that encompasses the, whole nationwide monitoring efforts that I was discussing earlier. And originally, you can see on the right, there's these little snow tubes. That's how we measure snow at these snow courses. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And eventually, that's only once a month. So now we're able, through technology advances, start measuring snowpack on hourly timescales. And I'm not sure exactly what the timescales when they first started, but that's when those SNOTEL stations started being placed throughout the West. And even to this day, SNOTEL stations are pretty much the main source of high elevation snowpack information, high elevation temperature information, just because these places are really hard to get to. It takes a lot of effort and people power in order to make these measurements. And something that's kind of cool, if you're interested in the history, I put a link in here. Like a lot of James Church's files and old photographs and log networks are now been archived and available to the public, which is really cool if you like the history of these kind of programs. There's also a book that you might be interested in called The Log of the Snow Survey. Is written by Patrick Armstrong, and he actually lives in McCall now. I'm not sure if he's in his late 80s or 90s, but he still goes and measures snowpack for us every month. Like skis miles to go do this. I'm so impressed, him and his family. He did his entire career down in the Sierra Nevada, which that book is more about measuring the snowpack in the Sierra, and it's just a really cool book. I really recommend it. Like natural history, the development of these like historic cabins, talks about avalanche science. It's a little bit of a local person, but that might be interesting to you as well. So I'm going to cheat and let you guys hear about the snow survey through this video that my predecessor put together, and he's in Nevada. So he's going to talk about the history of the program and a little bit more about relationship to Nevada, which applies to here as well. And we'll see if I can get to play. If not, I'll just switch over to YouTube real quick. There we go. I think I'm winning. Maybe. There we go. This could break my internet. I don't know. We'll see. I'm gonna stop my video for a minute just to give the internet a chance at my house to play for you guys. I don't think we're winning, are we? Oops. Okay, I'm just gonna. Oh, here we go. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, I'm Jeff Anderson. I'm a water supply specialist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in Reno, Nevada. The NRCS in Nevada runs a snow survey program which monitors the snowpack across the state to predict water supplies for our streams and rivers. Snow survey's roots run deep in Nevada. In 1908, Dr. James Church, professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, developed the snow tubes to measure water content of the snowpack. The snow tubes are driven into the snowpack to the ground and used to remove a snow cone. The tubes are then weighed with and without the snow, and the difference between those two weights is the amount of water contained in the snowpack. Hydrologists refer to this as the water content of the snow, or the snow water equivalent. It is the number of inches of liquid water that will be released from the snowpack when it melts. If a snow tube measurement contains 24 inches of snow water, it might be helpful to imagine a lake with water 2 feet deep stretching across the landscape in that area. In the Sierra, big winters have snow depths of over 20 feet and snow water contents upwards of 100 inches. If you have ever shoveled snow, you know sometimes it's light and fluffy powder, and other times it's wet and heavy cement. This is due to the variation of water content. From a water supply standpoint, it's better to weigh the snowpack to determine its water content than to focus on how deep the snow is. Dr. Church used the snow tubes to begin making snowpack measurements at snow courses on Mount Rose and in the Lake Tahoe Basin. Measurements were taken each year along the same transects. Those measurements allowed him to forecast how much Lake Tahoe would rise each spring. Today, the NRCS and other cooperators continue the work that Dr. Church began. During the winter, snow surveyors make monthly trips into the mountains to make measurements at over 50 snow courses. Some of those courses are the same ones that Dr. Church began measuring in the early 1900s. Today, a few of those courses have over 100 years of data. Starting in the late 1970s, the Federal Snow Survey Program began automating snow courses with electronic sensors to create SNOTEL sites. SNOTEL stands for snow telemetry. These weather stations radio in snowpack and precipitation data on an hourly basis. The SNOTEL system allows for real-time monitoring of water supply conditions, which is a huge advancement over once-a-month measurements at snow courses. The SNOTEL network has expanded through time. In Nevada and in the Eastern Sierra, there were about 50 sites installed by the 1990s. The current network has 90 sites, including 26 sites that have been installed since 2010. We continue to look for ways to improve the network. Today, SNOTEL sites measure water year precipitation, the snow water content of the snowpack, the overall depth of snow, as well as air temperature and soil moisture. A key component of every SNOTEL site is the snow pillow. Today, we're at a different SNOTEL site where the snow has already melted out so that you can see what the snow pillow looks like. It's this large bladder that's in front of me, and it's filled with antifreeze. as the weight of the snow piles up on top of this pillow, the snow pillow actually weighs the water.
Hey, Erin, I've lost the sound. I'm not sure if everyone else has.
Oh,
SNOTEL data are used
how's
by
that?
NRCS forecast hydrologists
Yeah, it's
to
come
make
back.
statistical stream forecasts. These forecasts are useful to water managers to regulate river flows and to manage reservoirs.
Thank you.
And to irrigation districts who use the forecast to determine water allocations. Forecasts and allocation decisions assist individual farmers and ranchers in planning their operations for the upcoming season. In this way, snow survey data are the backbone of the water management and water use in Nevada.
I'm Abram Shank, born and raised in the Fallon area. I currently serve on the Truckee-Carson Irrigation District Board of Directors. The data from SNOTEL is really important because we work really close with the Bureau of Reclamation and come up with forecasts. We look at it throughout the winter and try to come up with an idea of how we're going to utilize, well, number one, the snowpack that's available. So we have an idea of how we can set allocations and what the future is going to look like. That's probably the single most important aspect, is knowing what precipitation we're actually going to receive. And knowledge is power. Knowing the snowpack and knowing that data that's there allows us as a project to plan on how we're going to deliver that water, what it's going to look like. We can plan on improvements around that data and how to better deliver water to our users. As a board member, but also as a farmer, we understand the importance of having water. We're in the arid west and don't receive a lot of water. We're dependent on the snowpack and that Sierra front and receiving that water. So knowing the information of what is up there and what we're going to actually receive, that hard data is crucial and vital to our operations as a district in delivering and serving the end agriculture users and farmers in this valley and in this project.
Well, my name is Ernie Shank. I was born and raised here in the Fallon area. So I've had a lot of involvement with water, with snow surveying, with forecasting water supplies. In fact, for those of us who make our living farming, that is one of the most important and vital tools that we have. I start usually when the first snow falls, and I follow it until the last snowfall. Watch the stream forecast, watch the snow survey forecast. It's a very, very important tool, and we just really could not live without it. The year that really comes to my mind is the 2017 year, when we actually filled and drained Lahontan 3 times. And if it would not have been for the snow survey, we would have not been able to control the water like we did. We actually saved Fallon from flooding. Well, I think the information that we were able to glean from the SNOTEL and the snow survey reports in 2017 saved the Lahontan Valley. We would have had water in downtown Fallon had we not had that information and been able to plan ahead and do some of the things that this community had to do.
SNOTEL data are used to make streamflow forecasts for small creeks all the way up to the mighty Colorado River in southern Nevada. The uses of SNOTEL data stretch far beyond the NRCS water supply mission. The data are also useful for backcountry winter recreation, such as skiing, snowshoeing, and snowmobiling, as well as for avalanche forecasting. SNOTELs also allow you to track snow levels during the fall for hunting trips, or in the spring or early summer for backpacking adventures. All NRCS data are freely available on the internet to the public. The Nevada NRCS maintains a website with links to data, maps, graphs, and reports which summarize conditions for individual SNOTEL sites, as well as 12 major basins across our region. Additionally, each winter, the Nevada NRCS publishes water supply outlook report on a monthly basis from January 1st to May 1st. Please go to our website to subscribe for this report. To reach the website, type Nevada NRCS Snow Survey into your web browser. Thanks for your interest in the Snow Survey program. Here in Nevada, we live in the driest state in the country, and we really depend on that snowpack. So if there's anything that we can do to help you out, please contact your local field office. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was a really interesting video. We have a question in the chat.
Okay, go ahead, please.
When local weather folks indicate that snowpack is 75%, that's an indicator for sure, but does not indicate the water content necessarily, right?
We are actually talking about the water content when we're saying it's 75% of normal. So we're looking at, and I'm going to show you guys some graphics from like what you just saw in Nevada. For the Nevada, we have the same things in Idaho. So those are pretty much always, unless we say precipitation, if we say snowpack, it's basically a euphemism for snow water equivalent. So it means we have 76% of the water content that we do for the like historical average. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
Okay, so
Thank you.
sorry that the audio cut out. I realized I was coughing and I put myself on mute, and then I realized that somehow you guys can't hear the sound. That was weird. Good to know.
Yeah, I actually had a question about that because I think he was talking about the snow pillows filled with antifreeze at that time, and I'm really curious how that works.
Perfect. Yeah, we are going to get to that, and I'm going to save that question for about 3 more slides. Thank you. So that video, Jeff, who's my counterpart in Nevada, talked about how many other, SNOTEL stations and things like that. We have about 130 across Idaho and in the upper Snake basins. So we really monitor based on watershed. So where the water starts, and then because say the Snake River or the Pend Oreille River up north, or say the Oahe, they all start in other states. We look at it as a whole watershed, whole river kind of perspective. So we have stations that cover about 100,000 square miles that we're responsible for. Plus we have an additional 130 snow courses that are measured every single month during the winter season. So we start those January 1st, and then we go through June. Obviously some stations are like lower elevation, so we stop measuring them once the snow's gone. So it's quite a bit of effort. We have 8 people on our team who are involved in keeping this network going, and every state has a similar level of effort going on.
I've got another question here.
Yeah, go for it.
What changes to the number and locations of SNOTEL sites are needed to account for climate change?
That's a good question. And that is an active kind of pursuit. So what we're seeing is we need more high elevation sites. A lot of the sites originally were placed based on access. And so, because we have to revisit them to keep them going quite a bit, there's less helicopter access. It's more like we drive to most of these sites, or some of them we hike in. It's not that far, a couple miles. So we need more high elevation sites, and certain areas that are, like you can see on the map on the left, like the Clearwater and the Frank Church Wilderness. We don't have many sites in there because of the wilderness designation and the access issues, but that's a really big part of the water budget for what ends up flowing into the Columbia River. And so that's an area where we could get better data. I think it's really about looking at the whole range of elevation and then finding data gaps like what we see in the Clearwater in Idaho is a specific example. And we can talk a little bit more about that as well as kind of as more questions come up. I really appreciate all these good questions. I love this. This is great.
There's another one too.
Oh, yeah. Okay, shoot.
Does NRCS have data on how the removal of cover by wildfires have impacted SNOTEL readings, quicker or earlier melt and runoff events?
Yeah, so NRCS doesn't necessarily have that data, but and I think that's where the intersection of like the academic community or maybe yeah, different agencies that are kind of looking at those specific questions. So we do see a change in how the snowpack is affected by wildfire. And can you see the question one more time? Was it also about tree cover?
Yeah, how the removal of cover by wildfires have impacted SNOTEL readings. So
yeah, to be honest, I was on leave when we got a presentation with those exact details, so I can't actually tell you. But it does affect it, obviously, like the amount of tree cover affects how much snow falls on the ground. There's a big change with fires and the snow being dirtier, which we're going to talk about later, getting like more essentially like dust on it, which enhances melting. So yeah, there's quite a bit of ways, and I just don't know the answer specifically to say like this is a % of change we've seen. I think that's like going to be that's an ongoing research question that has really become more and more pertinent as the West experiences more wildfires. So that's a great question.
And Erin, it sounds like there's someone in the group that is studying this at BSU right now, Brent Wilder. So.
Oh, Brent, weigh in, please. Tell us what you know.
I don't think people can unmute, but that's good to know. Nice to meet you, Brent.
Maybe Brent can offer some specific thoughts in the chat. That's great to have your expertise contribute to the discussion. Thank you. Let's see here on the right. I'm going to keep plowing ahead here. These are the stations that inform the Boise watershed. Some of them are kind of on like a divide so that we can look at how snowpack is being affected in different adjacent watersheds. The light blue are those snow course measurements that Jeff mentioned. So we're going to talk about that next. So the snow courses, of course, are the historical ones. Some of these go back like 60 plus years, like Salmon Falls Basin. They've been monitoring snow at the same location for well over 60 years and been part of the overall program. And this is really, I think, an important thing to note is that, like I mentioned, the man, Patrick Armstrong, who wrote that book, there's a whole network of cooperators and individuals, people working for different agencies, people work for like some of the hydro power companies, who are going out and making these measurements every month across the entire nation. I mean, well, the West plus Alaska. And it's a huge effort. So what's really neat is that the historical record has continued for so long, so that questions like how are these changing with climate change can be answered. It's a very, very unique data set in the world. We're one of the longest running snow monitoring programs in the world. So we do these manual measurements in addition to those automatic stations, and that allows us to have greater, basically, geographic coverage and that historical record. We go out once a month and we measure these sites by using that snow tube, which is basically calibrated in a way that the diameter matches the amount of 1 inch equals water equals 1 inch on the tube. And so we go there and we make the measurements at the same place, same time, every month, and that's been going on for decades. So right here, that picture on the right, you know, we're masked up for last year, and that's at Moore's Creek. I'm kind of highlighting that because it's one of the most accessible sites if you want to go see, you know, a SNOTEL station, a snow course site in person. Or when you're skiing at Bogus, you'll see that weather station where they have a little webcam. That's also one of our SNOTEL stations. So those are the two most accessible if you want to like go, you know, take a look. So a closer look at the SNOTEL stations. That weird can thing, you can't see me pointing, but that brown thing with the little ring around the top, that's what we use to measure precipitation. It's got what's called an ultra shield on the top, and that just helps with increased precipitation falling into the can with wind, because we measure how much, not just snow, but how much water is being accumulated each year at the sites. I'm gonna try to stop that video just to reduce the bandwidth here. So on that snow pillow, which is that lower left, it's basically a giant bladder that's filled with a mixture of antifreeze and water. And as the snow lands on that, it displaces the fluid. And as you saw in that video, you saw the sort of fluid fluctuating. And we use like a pressure transducer to measure that changes in that fluid height. So over the winter, basically it's going up, and we're measuring that, that weight of the snow. And because the way it's calibrated, that's how we actually get at the water content of the snow. We also have like snow depth sensors. You can see on the top, it's like a, these are like sending out a, oh, I'm blanking on the word, electric pulse essentially. And it's, some of them are sound, some of them can be like lasers, but where it goes down and up, and it's measuring the distance by the travel time. And so the people who are looking at this data and making sure everything's working are using the precipitation, the snow depth sensor, and the snow pillow to really get a sense of what's going on at the station. So even though they're automated, meaning that a lot of this data is being measured on a 15-minute hourly basis and being transmitted, so you can see it online, there's still a lot of like people hours going into making sure that the data quality is good. And I think that's always important to note is, you know, there's a lot of effort, just like the USGS does with their streamflow data, to make sure that high quality data is being available to the public to inform all these, you know, water supply decisions. All the electronics are in that little brown shelter, and that's where, you know, basically the fluid that's in the precipitation sensor and the snow water pillow are going in there, and that's where, you know, those measurements are being made. Most of them are powered through a combination of solar panels and then, you know, a battery bank essentially. And then we also measure air temperature. Some of the sensor stations have different additional sensors like humidity, wind speed, things like that. And that is not quite ubiquitous across the network. You know, as technologies change, things get upgraded. And just because there's so many stations, it can take a little while for those implementations to be nationwide. Any questions, or can I move on?
Yeah, there's a question. Could the NRCS locate SNOTEL sites where the fire lookouts are located in the Selway Bitterroot and Frank Church wildernesses?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think that'd be nice if, probably for access, a lot of those sites are grandfathered in terms of predating the Wilderness Act. So helicopters are allowed in a certain kind of radius near there. So that's a good idea. I think it depends on the permitting and the coordination, all those things. It's quite a bit of work to get a site in.
But you have some in wildernesses?
It's a good question. I don't actually know. I'm thinking more about my experience operating in a wilderness area for the US Geological Survey and how that kind of works. That's a good question, but we are trying to work towards getting stations in that area. So it's a process.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So just a little sneak peek into the shelter. Those are the electronics. That big silver thing is basically a radio that pushes out the data. You got the battery bank on the bottom, and then that green bar is just, and that black thing is called the data logger. And then there's just another sensor board, so all the instruments can be plugged into the same spot, and then that goes to the radio. So it's just like a mess of wires and sometimes a bunch of mouse poop, but those are, that's how we pull the data off if we need to like physically get it. Okay, more snow science. why is the last snow near the trees during the melt season?
Shading from the trees, shading.
Y'all are so on top of it. I love it. Yeah, exactly. So like the shading from the trees basically prevents that area from melting as quickly as the more open areas. And so why is there no snow in the shade under the tree? Any thoughts?
Someone suggested it's blocked by branches, interception. The trees captured the snow in the crowns and it melted or sublimed off there, or the trees shed it.
Yeah, so exactly. The trees influence the distribution of the snow. So, here, depending on the tree, we have a lot of evergreens around here. So like they basically create a little shelter around it. And, that gets at that question about the fire and how tree cover would affect snow distribution in the mountains. And so, obviously if you burn off all the trees and the branches and stuff, you're going to have more snow around each tree than what would happen if the forest was hadn't been burned. And so the reason I wanted to bring up these particular puzzles is thinking about snow distribution. So the SNOTEL network plays a big part in understanding how snow is distributed across the West. And now we also have, and it also plays a huge part in the technology development of using satellites to measure snow depth. So this is using Sentinel data. It's a French satellite, I believe. And you can see how snowpack is distributed across the northern hemisphere. So the darker blue colors equals greater depths of snow. The lighter greens is less depth of snow. So just like thinking kind of big picture of like these like micro processes that affect snow distribution and melting, but also affect, just how snow covers the globe during the cooler months. So it's kind of, my goal is to link like these small processes to like some of the bigger picture snow science questions that are happening in the research community these days.
Do you have a hypothesis why there's a blank spot in the middle of British Columbia?
Probably because it was too cloudy and they couldn't get data. Sentinel is optical data, and the way that you get this snow depth data is you have overlapping images, and through those overlapping images and having repeat sets, you can difference the height of the snow. And so that area is probably just very cloudy. And there's also a lot of glaciers, and you get less information from the satellite from those really highly reflective surfaces. And so it can be hard to create those elevation services really accurately. So I'm guessing it's bad data. Didn't have it. So another reason why having the in-person measurements are a complement, even though we have these like really amazing technologies at this point to look at how snow is, to measure snow basically across the entire world. That's all like pretty emerging technology in the last like five plus years. It's pretty cool.
Is that HP Marshall from Boise State? Those authors?
There he is.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's a very prominent snow scientist in the community, and we're lucky to have him in our community. So yeah, good eye. Okay, so what is the Boise Snowpack doing right now? So across Idaho, we've got on the left, this is this year's snowpack, and then on the right, this is last year's snowpack for comparison. So there was that question, like, what are these percentages? Is that the water content? And so this is, like, for example, Boise it's a little small on my screen actually, 74% of normal. So what we're saying is that the snow water content is 74% of the 30-year historical median, meaning that, you know, whatever that middle value is over 30 years. So we are about 25% below normal in the Boise Basin. Last year at this time, we were at 93% of normal. So our snowpack has not developed as much and is not as, you know, healthy compared to last year. What we're experiencing is a pretty similar pattern of snow distribution you can see in the northern basins. So like that Clearwater Basin versus Salmon Basin boundary. Really, the storm patterns have favored northern Idaho over the last couple of years. So last year, northern Idaho was pretty much the only place where we had a normal snowpack, and this year it's also where we're only seeing a closer to normal snowpack. You know, the Coeur d'Alene, Spokane area basin is doing the best out of the entire state. And then you can see last year how that kind of central west, the Wood and Lost basins, those are those darker orange colors. Those really, really got hammered without, sorry, I shouldn't probably say that way. They got way, way, way less snow than they normally do. So they were very below average. And that was their second year of drought. And we're still seeing kind of that same pattern emerge this year as well.
Okay, someone is asking if the 30-year average is about to shift from 1980 to 2010 to 1990 to 2020.
Yeah, so they implemented that shift in November. So we are looking at the 1991 to 2020 normal. And you can see it on the top in the little the label, I guess. So yeah, and there's a lot of interesting work that can be done looking at how those normals have shifted over time. And yeah, so those kind of questions will be, I'm sure a lot of people will be looking at those now that this data is available. And this matches.
And is that normal lower for 2020 versus 2010?
For the Boise area?
Yeah.
I meant to look it up and I can't, honestly, I can't remember. I'm so bad at keeping all these numbers in my head. Yeah, it's, I guess I won't say because I don't know, but that's a good question. And I'll show you guys later on the interactive map how you could find that out. And we could probably just look it up while we do it then. Okay, so this is what the Boise specific watershed is. These are individual dots are showing the SNOTEL stations and their specific percentages. So the higher elevation sites are a little bit better. We've just had a warmer winter, so like we've gotten more snow at higher elevations than lower elevations. Plus we have more melting. And I think one thing to note is like that Prairie Station. Why is it 162% of normal? What's going on there? So I want to talk about that in a second. And then the Boise Basin is actually composed of sub-basins. So if you're really concerned about certain parts of the Boise watershed, you can look at it at a more granular scale. So the Morse Creek area, the North and Middle Fork, and the South Fork. So they're all pretty similar. The Boise Basin in general is fairly homogeneous and being in that kind of 70 to 75% of normal for water content. So, yep, go ahead.
Does the shift to a new normal, like a new 30-year normal, create misperceptions about the health of the snowpack? Less snowpack may not be as noticeable in the data because of the long-term data being on a long-term decline.
Yeah, and that's, I think, something we're kind of looking into. You can see on our website that there's a snowpack normal report that my colleague Danny Tappa put out. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question that is still being evaluated, to be honest, just because getting to that new normal is, in the last few months that we're able to evaluate. I think the tricky thing is that those normals were calculated using different methods, so you can't compare one to other. quite, it's not quite as straightforward as a direct comparison. So it's like one of those things that actually requires a little bit more digging in to figure out. And we're still, in that process of learning where those shifts are happening. I mean, in general, the snowpack is being reduced, but the median represents, 50% of the snowpack during that 3-year time period is lower than that middle value, the median, and 50% is higher. So it's still representing kind of like that central tendency for the 30-year time period. I wish I had a better answer for you. We're still kind of figuring those things out.
And I wonder, is it normal to be 75% of normal sometimes? Like that percentage, is that normal variance for this area?
Yeah, let's look at that. Next slide. Okay, so this is looking at the whole Boise basin. You saw these plots. We call these the AWS plots. I got to move the little people part so I can see the legend here. Okay, so this is the snowpack for all years of measurement for the Boise snowpack. So the shading represents basically the entire range that we've seen in the Boise watershed for the snowpack. So the upper part is like, the biggest snowpack year, and the bottom of the red is like the lowest snowpack year. That green line is the median, so that 50% range for that 30-year normal, which is that 1991 to 2020 period. So the black line is where we are at with the 2020 snowpack. The orange line is what we had last year. And then I put on 2015 because it's kind of our most recent memory of like a really bad snow year. And that's that purple line. So the way that you would interpret these here is, they're computed on the daily time step. So that black line, you can see where we had that, well, sorry, my thing is covering the legends on my screen. So let me just make sure I get it. So you can see where we had that, the black line goes from like pretty low and then it, steps up really quickly. And that's those mid to late December storms that we had going into like just over a year. And then it flatlines because, as everybody knows, it just has not been snowing. We've had a really, really record low kind of time period of low snowpack development during the winter. So originally that black line where we were above the median and we were getting into that, let's see this, I think it's the 70th percentile, that like kind of green shading area. And then it was, we are now in the 30th percentile, meaning that 70% of the time of years of measurement in the snowpack has been better than where we're at currently. So we are definitely in that lower 30th percentile for where our snowpack is. We're not as bad as 2015, but we're not doing much better, to be honest. Oh, sorry, I had to click my screen. There we go. So snowpack, it really isn't the entire story. It's an incredibly important part, but it's not the entire story. We also look at the total precipitation over what's called the water year. So the water year is different than like a calendar year. It starts on October 1st and then runs till September 30th. And it sort of mimics the irrigation season and things like that, and the sort of seasonal cycle of snowpack development and dry periods during the summer. So on the left, we've got what our snowpack looks like, and then on our right, we've got what our precipitation total is. So if we look at the total water year picture, our precipitation total is doing better, 86% compared to that 74% of normal. And that's because we had a wet month during the fall that helped get our total precipitation up a little bit higher. And generally, climatologically, we have a wet spring around here. So we will continue to kind of see those snowpack and precipitation numbers diverge if we get that spring rain. So it's not quite as bad as it looks. One of the big things about precipitation that influences our streamflow runoff is how saturated the soils get during the fall rains before the soil freezes up and, is basically not absorbing as much water. And so last year we had really, really dry soils in the fall, water year 21, we're in water year 22 now. So the previous water year, we had these really dry soils. So last year when the snowpack melted, a lot of that snow melt didn't go straight into like the groundwater or the surface water because it was being absorbed by that soil reservoir. So soil moisture plays a big part in how much runoff is generated by the snowpack. We also call that like the runoff efficiency. So looking at these precipitation numbers gives you a better sense of what's going on with the overall water supply picture.
Erin, what does ADP stand for?
What was it? ADP?
ADP, I think it was on your previous
Maybe
slide.
I misremembered what you heard. The graph for the SWE.
The SWE, yeah.
You called it the ADP plot or something like that?
Oh, sorry. We call them AWS plots, automatic water.
AWS.
Yeah, sorry. It's like just when we were talking about these plots. And so you can get these plots by clicking on the interactive map on the basin or the SNOTEL station, and you'll see this plot for the specific thing that you clicked on. So I thought I put one in for the Prairie Creek and Morris Creek. I might have moved it in my slide deck. So you can look at individual stations, but you can also look at a basin-wide scale to get to these. And then on the right, you can just toggle on off the different years that you're interested in looking at. Thanks for your question, clarifying. So we also have the same style plot for precipitation to look at that, water year picture. And here, the 2015 is that purple line. The current year is the black line. Orange is last year, and then green is that like the median, the historical median. So you can see that we are actually, in terms of total precipitation, tracking for where we were at last year at the same time, but we are below 2015 levels in terms of precipitation. And I was living in Alaska at the time, and I think 2015 maybe had a little bit of a wetter fall, or just like more of those steps you can kind of see in that January to early March time period. Even though it was warm, it was still raining, just wasn't snowing. New snow, more snow science question. Which house has better insulation?
The one on the right, the one with more snow, the right, the roof.
Oh man, I got all these snow science experts on the call. I love this. This is amazing. Yeah, so the house on the right. And it kind of gets, and I look, this picture also gets at the concept of like how air temperature and insulation affects, the snowpack, both in terms of melting and the accumulation. So like, yeah, the house on the left, they don't have very much insulation. So the heat that's generating the house is melting their roof, except along the eaves because it's cold outside. And so those eaves aren't insulated. So that cold air is affecting the roof temperature and making it so it's cold enough to snow to stay on that eave there. And then on the right, the house, has better insulation. And so the snowpack is more mimicking the outside temperature because it's not being influenced. This is kind of when you think about snowpack melting and energy budgets, this is one of the kind of concepts that people think about modeling. Where is the snow going to melt first? What are the big influences on snowpack melting and things like that?
Jennifer Lightfoot is asking about the albedo effect.
Perfect segue. Perfect segue. All right, so which part of the roof is covered with asbestos? You can see the age of the book, asbestos shingles, which basically, well, I don't know. I assume that's like similar to asphalt shingles, except with lung cancer. And which part has wood shingles? Think albedo. It's a perfect segue. So albedo.
Asbestos on the right. The snow is covering the wood.
Snow is covering the wood, exactly. So albedo is basically a fancy way of saying, or yeah, a nerdy way of saying how much energy or light is reflected off a surface. So a darker surface absorbs more heat, more energy, and is warmer. And then a lighter surface reflects more. And this is like a huge, huge thing in terms of climate change, because as we lose snow coverage, snow reflects so much energy. Is actually a lot of energy incoming during the winter is being reflected back out. It's like having a sort of like a mirror-like surface on the ground. So in this picture, because the asphalt shingles are darker, they're absorbing more of that radiation, so the snow is melting because it's basically effectively being heated up more than the wood shingles, which are lighter, and obviously different material also is playing into it, and so reflecting more energy. And this is like a huge kind of concept in terms of thinking about how snow melt is happening every winter, and just general like the global energy budget, and why it's a big reason why climate change is affecting like northern latitudes more than these mid latitudes that we live in. Another way that albedo is affected is dust on snow, and this gets back to a fire question as well, is that fires are generating fires and like pollution and just changes in snow cover, availability of dust is all changing like these global albedo budgets, so energy budgets, and affecting how snow melt is progressing in these snow dominated basins. So this picture and this study is from Colorado. And basically these NASA scientists found that, because snow was melting earlier and there's just less coverage and changes in land practices and things like that, there's just more dust being generated and covering snow. And so the dust is such a big part, plays such a big role in that snowpack absorbing more of the radiation come springtime, that it is actually the dominant factor in controlling the timing of stream flow in that region over like warming air temperatures. So that's a pretty, I would say, powerful example of how albedo affects the timing on stream flow and snowpack.
Maria says that the city of Philadelphia requires all new roofs to be white.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. Go Philadelphia. That's really cool. Yeah, albedo, you'll see that when you walk around, like, and hopefully these kind of examples are just like, not just only like connecting like what you might see walking around, like why is the snow melting in that area? Oh, it's dirtier. Or why is it, sticking around longer? And then like thinking sort of globally about how these patterns are affecting the distribution of snow, the melting of snow, the timing of water from snowpack. So I'm going to kind of apparently I'd put way too much stuff in my talk, so if it's okay, I'll keep going. Are we for time check? Since we're kind of doing questions.
I think we've got time. This is going till 1, right?
Yeah, I can. See what time it is. Okay.
And we've got another question, if you've got time. Where's the dust coming from? Is there a dust bowl effect? Is it getting worse?
So let's see here. I put a little bit of note from the article on here. It says windblown dust has increased in the US Southwest as a result of changing climate patterns. So that's probably wind directions and human land use decisions. With rainfall decreasing and more disturbances of the land, protective crusts on soil are removed and more bare soil is exposed. Winter and spring winds pick up the dusty soil and drop it on the Colorado Rockies. And they're saying historical lake sediment analysis. So this is where they take like the core of the sediment to see how much is accumulating each year. Says that there's been 5 to 7 times more dust falling on the Rocky Mountain snowpack than there was before the mid 1800s. So it sounds like from that area is being affected by a lot of land use changes. So humans making the soil more prone.
And does that dust come from the Great Basin?
It doesn't
or
say.
From the Midwest, Central Mississippi?
It says from the US Southwest. So maybe part of the Great Basin, but it seems like more of the southern part of the country. So south of there. That's as much as I know about this particular study. But I do have the link here, and so folks can dig into the details. Thanks for all the good questions. I appreciate it. I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. So we're going to talk about a little bit application of SNOTEL data. You know, our mission is focused on agriculture and water supply. But of course, like, you know, here we're the whitewater state. So timing of snowmelt really affects our tourism industry and our recreation industry for people who enjoy being on the rivers. It affects the timing for water for fisheries, and that's a huge issue. And hydropower generation, also flood control, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of ways that the SNOTEL data is used beyond water supply. So one of the things that I learned when I started here is that how much of our surface water is generated by the snowpack. This is a 2016 study where it was like looking at overall and aggregate very large areas. So about 75% of snow melt is generated, or sorry, 75% of streamflow is generated from snow melt. There's been better analyses that have occurred since this study. Excuse me. And so if you look at the entire United States and in terms of the Western United States, so west of the Mississippi, 53% of the total runoff in the Western United States originates as snowmelt, despite only 37% of precipitation falling as snow. So it plays a huge part. And if you look at the mountainous areas, which is more similar to what this USGS study is, in general, it's about 70%. In Idaho, we're looking at kind of like the 60 to 75%, depending where you are in Idaho. Certain areas that are really mountainous could be up to 90% of the surface water is generated by snowmelt. So snowpack plays this like incredibly huge part in the water budget in the West. Yeah, I'm gonna give you some other facts about that in a minute. So we looked at this where, you know, this is a map of where snowpack is the dominant source of runoff. Obviously, Idaho, the Upper Snake, it's a huge component. So it is an extremely important part of our economy since agriculture is such a big part of the Idaho economy. There's some studies, and this is I have a link towards in the notes for when they post the presentation, but there's this website that's they're looking at like the economic impacts of snow, and they're estimating the valuable usable water from snow represents about $216 million. I think that's on an annual basis. I guess, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly. in terms of looking at the middle snake, which the Boise River system is a part of the middle snake watershed, we generate about 60% of the volume of runoff is from snow, so a little bit lower just because we have more low elevation areas in the middle snake area. And with about 6.5 million acre feet of water generated from snow and about another a little over 3 generated from rain. So we are still a snow dominated system, even though we have a lot more low elevation areas. You can see that like Salmon Clearwater is the most heavily snow dominated region within Idaho, as well as the upper snake headwaters. I might just kind of move past this a little bit. We kind of talked about how snowpack affects stream flow, where, you know, if you have a low snowpack, you're going to have less stream flow. Early melting can affect that. And we talked a little bit about the soil saturation factor that helps determine how much of that snowpack actually makes it into surface water runoff immediately versus, you know, seeping into that soil, you know, reservoir system, and then eventually becomes groundwater and moving into surface water eventually. These kind of graphics are pretty cool by the Bureau of Reclamation. You can look at different points on the rivers. This is an unregulated river, so this is at Snake, the Snake River at Flag Ranch, which is upstream of Jackson Lake Dam. And so you're familiar with the snowpack part. That's that like kind of rainbow colored graphic showing how the snowpack varies in that area. And then the gray area is the same thing, but in terms of stream flow. So you can look at that medium stream flow. You can see how, you know, the timing of the melt as like, you know, as the snowpack melts, then you get that increase in your stream flow. So this is kind of a cool tool if you want to explore how snowpack affects stream flow. I tried to bring one up for Boise, but all of our stream flow forecast points in Boise are actually regulated by Army Corps and Bureau of Reclamation, and you know all the different agencies that operate our reservoir system and dam system. So that's why here you can see the relationship between snow and stream flow, and here that relationship is lost because it is a regulated system. And that's why you have those different spikes in stream flow. Still kind of cool to see like the timing of it, because there is like, you know, like a pattern of how they go about regulating flow on the Boise River.
I think that this might be unregulated forecast because the Boise River hasn't been above 10,000 CFS in 75 years.
Okay. With the like that January 1st spike.
Yeah, I mean, it like when we had our bad flooding in 2017, it got to almost 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
But they do forecast what the unregulated flow would be, like
Right.
do the inflow of the reservoirs or something like that, and those go to 18,000 all the time. So this might be
The combination.
If there weren't a dam here, what it would look like.
Oh, okay. I'll have to
I'm
double check
guessing,
on
I don't
that
know.
because I might be told. It sounds like I'm like really was misinterpreting that for the Boise River. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll look into that more.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good contribution. Just in interest of time, I'm gonna keep moving here. So NRCS puts out these stream flow forecasts based on snowpack, and this is based on the historical relationship with stream flow and snowpack. So we issue them on what are called exceedance probability. So basically how confident we are that you're going to have this amount of water. For this year, if we're looking at sort of that mid-range, you know, it's like not a conservative forecast, but it's not really optimistic either. It's that middle of the ground. We're looking at still below normal stream flow because of our below normal snowpack. So we're looking at like 80 to 89% of normal stream flow at these different forecast points. And I wanted to show that you can also access what the entire range of stream flow forecasts are for those different forecast points. So these graphics are a little kind of confusing at the beginning, but they basically show the range of potential outcomes based on those historical relationships. So on the left is like the stream flow, the amount of water that we feel very confident about, 90% probability. And so like say for that top one, South Fork of the Boise River at Anderson Ranch Dam, we're confident with this snowpack that we'll have at least 48% of our normal stream flow. That mid-range forecast is that 83%, that's in bold. And then if you look, that gray line is what 100% of stream flow would look like. And then on the very far right, the blue is like, this is our super optimistic forecast. We're gonna have 120%. Yeah, so we really emphasize that middle ground forecast, that 50% exceedance value. But in years like last year where we had those dry soils, I was urging people to look at the 70 or 90% exceedance forecast. If you really wanted to count on a certain amount of water, you could be more confident like you were going to get that amount of water. And last year, just with those dry soils, the reality, the observed stream flow did line up more with that 70 to 90% stream flow. So it's the more conservative kind of forecast to look at if you're really wanting to know how much water to count on. And then of course, like, these are at different forecast points. So depending on your area of interest. Looking at what our reservoir storage is, because that's a huge part of our water budget. This is those teacup diagrams from Bureau Reclamation. So right now, the Boise River system is sitting about 50% of capacity. And on the next one, I'll show you how that compares to the historical average. So I don't know a ton about how they move water through the system, but I know a lot of that water is stored in the upper reservoirs, so Arrow Rock and Anderson Ranch, and then like that water slowly moved downstream into Lucky Peak and like Lake Lowell. So that's why there's such a discrepancy between those reservoirs, is because Army Corps, Bureau Rec, and like I'm not sure who operates the power side of things. They're managing for a lot of different things, which influences where they're storing water and the timing. And, like if it was a big snowpack year, they'd be thinking more about flood control and making sure there's enough room in the reservoirs for that incoming spring snowmelt. So these are updated on a daily basis, and they're pretty useful to just kind of see how the overall reservoir storage system is working. So this is looking at where our reservoir storage is for the Boise system. In blue, that's our current year. The green line is the previous year, and the red line is our average. So our reservoir storage is definitively below average this year. And that's because, we're basically in our second year below snowpack. So last year, we didn't have the snow melt to fill up the reservoirs. We had a lot of demand on the reservoir water in terms of irrigation demand because it was such a hot and dry summer. So that is like a big concern for water supply in like the Boise Basin, the Upper Snake, is that last year we had a lot of water to rely on that was already stored from a previous good snowpack year. And so it kind of supplemented the bad snowpack from last year. And so there wasn't as much water shortages, in particular basins. And then this year we don't have what's called that reservoir carryover capacity. And so that that's a concern for folks who are relying on water for irrigation. It's just kind of like one of those bigger picture things that we're taking into account, not just of the snowpack, but like kind of like the storage of the snowpack water. I think in terms of time, I'm not going to do this, but I just want to let you know is that we have this IMAP. This is where a lot of these figures are being generated. There's all sorts of different things you can look at there. You can look at what the average is. How far below are we in terms of snowpack, precipitation, snow depth? You can look at snow density, so you can see, is that snowpack getting closer to melting point? You can look at the streamflow forecast there. It's a good tool for like spatially exploring what's going on. And of course, you know, you can look up for the entire West, not just Idaho, like I was showing you guys. Another really cool tool is this USGS tool, and I've got the link there, is exploring the snowpack. And it kind of puts some of these graphics all in the same place, where on the NRCS IMAP, you're having to look at those individually. So I'm just gonna keep going because we're running out of time, but this is another tool that I think is pretty cool. In terms of like climate change stuff, I was asked to include a little bit of that, and I tried to look up, like, you know, what are the latest studies. So this one's from 2020. On the top, we're looking at the historical snowmelt runoff ratio that we were talking about, like that 70-ish percentile. And in the West, we get kind of in the 50 to 90% of snowmelt being a big part of the streamflow runoff. And then on the lower two, those graphics that have all the red in them, these are looking at how climate change, two climate change scenarios, and how that would affect the snow melt runoff ratio. So we're looking at, you know, a kind of a 15 to 25% decline in snow melt influence on stream flow. The left hand is the less bad climate warming scenario, and the right is the sort of worst case, you know, the world doesn't do anything about climate change. This is what it would look like. And I think this is by the end of century, so 2100. So this is a more recent, or I mean, a study from 2017, also looking at how much snowpack is influenced, or how much streamflow is influenced by snowpack. Honestly, I'm gonna skip that, but it's the same thing. It's just trying to show that, like, you know, there's multiple studies that are kind of coming to that same conclusion. You know, maybe a decrease in 20-25% reduction in streamflow from snowpack because of climate change, basically less snowpack. Because irrigation relies so heavily on snowpack. This is a fairly recent study in Nature Climate Change looking at the share of irrigation demand met by snowpack. And you can see that for us, the Columbia River Basin, is that we're not the highest influence, but we are like maybe the second influence. So a big share of our snowmelt water is actually used by irrigation. For us in the spring, that's wheat. And then this paper looks at a lot of different crops and is looking at that global picture of like what crops are more specifically impacted by changes in runoff and runoff timing. These are some specific links to those basin charts, those AWS plots that we looked at, the interactive map, and then that USGS tool that I spoke about earlier. We also put out a water monthly outlook report on water supply that focuses on those stream flow predictions, and then what, you know, the snowpack and precipitation are doing. So if you want to get on our email list for that, or you can just access it on our website, feel free to shoot us an email. And there's my email if you have any other questions or have other information you'd like to share. I really appreciate it. So I'm gonna wrap up, so because I'm way over.
Well, thank you, Erin. That was fantastic. It it really highlights how a simple question has a complicated answer. And that is just great science. And we really, really appreciate the breadth and depth of your knowledge. That was just fantastic. I want to remind folks that these Riverside Chats are sponsored by Kennedy Wilson. And please keep an eye on our website or look for our email blast for future Riverside Chats. And I want to thank all of you for coming and for your great participation, great questions. And we hope to see you at the next Riverside Chat. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. Yeah, feel free to shoot it, the ones I don't know, to me, and I'll figure them out for you. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And this talk was recorded. Is this going to be available on our website later?
Yes, we'll post it. I think Marissa would know more about that than I, but I think it takes a few days for it to become available. So we'll post it to our website and we'll post it to our social media, whatever that is. So yeah, look for those too. And in fact, Brent has a YouTube channel where you can see all of our Riverside Chats as well as some other presentations.
Thank you.